Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Linda Lampert, and thank you for joining me for this short webinar on technology adoption in disruptive times. I'm part of the GP Strategies Enterprise Technology Adoption team, and like many of you, I'm working from home these days. And while I've worked through some pretty disruptive times, I'll say this one takes the cake. And it's a huge reminder that in everything we do, we need to have a strong plan for continuity. And that's what I'll be talking about for these next 20 minutes or so. I've been working in the area of enterprise technology implementation for over 25 years, so I've seen my share of disruptions. Some of them, like 9/11 or the major typhoon that hit our project team in Shanghai, were completely unpredictable, while others, like the 1996 Olympics that shut down Atlanta, where we had a project team, for those, we had a pretty good idea of what was coming. And of course, the impact of disruption might depend on where you're at in your project. I know lots of organizations now that are struggling with getting people ready for go live with training that was created for classroom instruction. The important part, I think, is to think proactively and comprehensively about your solution and what it will take to accomplish your objectives. That being said, in putting together this webinar, I found 4 things that I think are key to being prepared for and reacting to disruptions like the one we're currently experiencing. Here are the 4 keys I've identified, and I'm going to talk through each one in a bit more detail. The first key I'm going to talk about is ensuring that you have a flexible learning strategy. Just what do I mean by learning strategy? First of all, this is something that's created based on your organization's vision and mission and strategic objectives, and it defines the strategic intent of your solution. These 2 items are really key because they're going to help you make tough decisions when your plans are disrupted. Is your mission to ensure business continuity? Is it to ensure that every employee is fully capable of doing their job? Those 2 missions might result in some very different decisions if your business gets disruptive. So that's why it's so important to have this spelled out. The second major part of the strategy is that it outlines the elements of your solution and which audiences will use each element. In effect, these are the tools of your toolkit and which tools might work for each audience. As you can guess, in times like these, it's critical to have flexibility here, as some tools might not be available all the time. So let's take a look at what the strategy might actually look like. This is a typical strategy that we might put together for an organization. And take a look here. You can see it starts in the upper left corner with stakeholder alignment and change enrollment. This is really the change management part of your solution, and making sure that people are aware of what's happening, when it's happening, why it's happening. Typically, we partner that then with role-based learning journeys with flexible learning elements. And I mentioned flexibility once already there. For many organizations, those learning journeys are then assessed and potentially certified. That depends on your organization, whether or not that's something you need. And then once we get back on the job, very, very critical is time of need performance support. This is help that people have back on the job. And we know this is so critical because something like 80% of learning really takes place back on the job. Then, of course, we follow that up oftentimes with collaboration and knowledge sharing. And this might be a place where super users play a role. You might have communities of practice that are sharing knowledge and lessons learned here. But that element of peer-to-peer, colleague-to-colleague sharing is really critical in our modern learning solutions. And then finally, performance measurement and continuous improvement. And this is really about having the tools in place to let you see how successful your strategy is to let you see the business results of what's going on and really to target areas where you need to do continuous improvement of either your learning strategy, your help solution, your super user network, potentially business processes, but really the last critical element there. And really what our challenge is in these times is helping to ensure the continuity of this solution. And you can see this is a pretty, while it's pretty typical, it's not a simple solution. And so our recommendation in these disruptive times is to focus on the essential elements. And I'm going back here to the adult learning model that we've used at GP Strategies in our technology adoption solutions. I've been using it for over 20 years with hundreds of companies to help ensure that employees are prepared to use new technology. And it's a simplified model that lets us really focus in on what elements do we need in our disruptive times. So it starts over here with prepare me, and that's really that, change management kind of an element. And here, when we're in these kinds of times, we need to make sure that our strategy and our solution has clear communications on reliable networks that clearly articulate the roles and responsibilities of each individual, as well as a clear change story. Why is it that I need to be paying attention to this change? Why is it important? What's in it for me? That change story really needs to be embraced by every employee if you're going to be driving adoption of your new technology. And that's particularly true in disruptive times. Partnering that with an accessible means of providing feedback and asking questions is just critical. It can't be something that's complicated. People need to have an easy email to send or a button to press to get those questions answered, to get that feedback provided. And that's all just critical in your solution. The next step really is the tell me section. So this is where we tell people what they need to know in order to do their job correctly, in order to execute their job tasks and accomplish their job outcomes. And I mention job outcomes because this is where you're really going to be able to focus your solution and not have to worry about developing and delivering nice to know things, but really to focus on what do people need to know in order to accomplish their job outcomes. And what we found is that process and other conceptual information related to job outcomes is often the most important driver of adoption and adoption success. We might think that step-by-step tasks is the most important thing for us to get. If we give everybody job aids that tell them what to do, we're going to meet our goals. And what we found is that process and other conceptual information, roles and responsibilities is actually a better driver of adoption than just focusing on job tasks. The other thing I would say here is make sure that as you're creating this content, you create it in such a way that it can be leveraged for virtual sessions or e-learning, not just instructor-led. So that may involve putting in a little bit more detail in your content. It may involve making sure that you have notes so that someone can pick up that content and deliver it who's not necessarily the subject matter expert. So after tell me, the next piece we typically include then is show me. And this is where you're going to typically in the old world would have an instructor up showing people how to do tasks in the system. Here for our sustainable continuity session, we're going to want to make sure that we leverage technology to model task performance to the extent that we can. So that might include using simulations, using video recordings, or it might include having demonstrations by super users, either live in person or using some kind of webinar. But that show me piece is important for people because they can see how an expert user does things and model that. And if you can make that content available when people need it, that'll help your solution even more. Following up show me is giving people an opportunity to try it themselves. And the objective here is to provide a safe practice space for them. And obviously, that is important, but it's it's really critical with some of our learners. If they're working on master data or something that's really important, you don't want to have them just going into a production system and trying it. So in our disruptive times, a lot of our customers are now using sandboxes to provide that opportunity. If they have a simulation capability, they're doing that. But you could also explore non-tech options like remote or in-person over-the-shoulder coaching. This let me piece is really critical, and having a couple different options for how you provide it is going to help your solution be more sustainable. And then finally is help me. So as they're doing things, making sure that they have the help they need at the time that they need it. And that is not just which key do I press, but also when do I do this, what's the end result look like, what happens after this, etc. And this is where super users can play a really critical role, because if they're available to answer process and other questions, oftentimes people have help, but then they need that extra little bit there. So super users can play a critical role there. The second key after your strategy is having effective operating processes. And while we may be tempted to wing it a lot of times, disruptive times make it even more critical that we define and follow operating procedures. So let's look at 4 areas where I think preparation and follow-through can make a huge difference in our operating processes. And the first one that you see there is project management. On our projects, we are very meticulous about making sure that we have trackers, we have plans, we know what's going to be happening and when it needs to happen and what the triggers are for that. All of those project management skills are really critical in disruptive times, and especially if you're at risk of losing a colleague to illness or something like that, it's really important to know where they're at with what they're doing, what their holdups might be, etc. So project management is the first area there. The next one is making sure that you have clear roles and responsibilities. And whether you're the project manager, you're a developer of learning content, you're a subject matter expert, you're doing Q&A, it's important to know what you're responsible for and when you need to do it. And again, that helps with just having everything nailed down in those disruptive times, making sure that there aren't barriers to getting your solutions ready, and also just knowing who's doing what when. Meeting management also plays a really critical part, and I think probably a lot of you are seeing this if you are now dialing into remote meetings. And I will say, you know, in that project I mentioned with the typhoon in Shanghai, in the Atlanta Olympics situation, having good meeting management skills was really important. The graphic there is from my Shanghai project, where we had a golden hour when meetings happened and subject matter experts could dial in from around the world. And that was really critical. If you've got a global project team, doing simple things like either using video and having people being able to see you as you speak, or using a whiteboard or note taker so that everyone can see the words that you're saying and agree to them in English, you know, that's really critical for those project teams that are operating with people who are not native language speakers. So we've used all of those in both disrupted times and non-disrupted times to help ensure our meetings are well managed. And then the fourth thing is around structured communication. And having a plan in place to make sure that your team is integrated is really critical. You can see some examples on the slide here of making sure that your, regular team meetings, status reports, having a tracker or a backlog that's detailed and is visible to everyone, and even things like making sure you've got, you know how you're going to get in touch with your SMEs, and having support for bilingual team members is a really critical part of communication. And as you're thinking about those operating processes, the third key to success goes hand in hand, which is being able to leverage tool capabilities for continuity. Which tools you use and how you use them will depend on your learning strategy and let's be frank, the resources you have available. But if you're thinking about tools, I would suggest that you think about how those tools can help ensure your solution's continuity. So, for example, looking at the slide, during development, a lot of tools will automatically facilitate reviews and development workflow. That can be very helpful in times like these. Obviously, during learning delivery, many tools help enable learning journeys, obviously delivering e-learning content to people, but also supporting super user delivery. So think about how those tools can be used for that. And then I talked earlier about the criticality of performance support, making sure that the content that you've developed for performance support for help is easy to access is really critical. And also your super users can use that performance support content in their work. So making sure they know how to use it and have access to it is really critical. And then the last area here I'll mention is for learning in the flow of work. And you may not have heard that term before. It's a term we use with modern learning solutions where you teach people at the time that they need it. You don't worry about putting them through a class weeks or months before they might have to do something. When it's time to learn, when it's time to do a task, you provide the learning then. So many of our modern learning tools and our performance support tools enable the learning in the flow of work, and that can be just invaluable in disruptive times right now. The last area I'll talk about is having empowered super users. And time again, I've seen the power of a few dedicated individuals turn around situations that might otherwise have sunk a program. And why have they been able to do this? It's because they've been purposefully equipped to fulfill their roles as super users. There's a lot of webinars and white papers that talk in far more detail than I have time to about how to ramp up super users. The best advice I can give you is to start early, to ensure that each individual understands their roles and responsibilities, and to ensure that they have the tools they need to be successful. And that includes having a plan so that they are continuously in the loop on developments and they know who to contact for help. So that's a lot to digest in a short period of time. I want to finish up by giving you some suggestions for some things that you can do right now. And the first one is to review your strategy and really identify what are the essential elements and what can you do to ensure the continuity of those essential elements. Next, I would say take a look at your operating processes and your roles and your responsibilities and identify any risk areas you have. Do all team members have the skills and the knowledge and the tools and the technology they need to effectively do their roles in a disruptive environment? I would say also to audit the tools that the team will be using to design, develop, and deliver the solution, and think about how will those tools potentially help ensure continuity. Are there changes that you need to make to the tools you're using or how you're using them to help manage the risks that you might see? Also, review your super user strategy if you have one. And that will help you make sure that the super users are or will be fully equipped to support their role. I'd also suggest that you prepare your team, right? Some of us have time on our hands these days, and this is a great time to ensure that your team members have multiple means of working together and that they have the skills that they need to take advantage of those means. And finally, I would encourage you to take advantage of this moment. Now, every day we are gaining insight into what it means to live in disruptive times. And frustrating as it may be, this, I think, is also a bit of a gift from the universe. So I would encourage you to try to take the lessons that we're learning and apply those to make your solutions even stronger and take this gift that the universe is giving us. And on that note, I would encourage you to reach out to me if you have any questions or comments. My contact information is on the screen right now, and I will be sitting project team in Shanghai working with you. I wish you good luck